Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this webinar on the military coup in Sudan explained. This is a seminar that's organized by Bergen Global. That is a dissemination arena by Crystal Michelsen Institute and the University of Bergen. My name is Lovise Aalen. I'm a senior researcher at CMI. I have two excellent panelists with me today. That is Tønnessen, who is the senior researcher and the director of Law and Social Transformation, a center that's based at TMI and the University of Bergen. And then I have Salma Abdalla, who is also a political scientist based in Ås in Norway. And we are going to dig into why there was a military coup in Sudan this very Monday. We're going to look at what are the implications of the coup and also the prospects of democracy in Sudan. As you know, maybe, Sudan is a country in the larger Horn of Africa region in Africa, in sub-Saharan Africa. It has around 44 million people. It was a former British colony, independent in 1956. Then the southern part of the country, South Sudan, became an independent country in 2011. Throughout Sudanese history, there have been many military coups. There have been intermezzo's of democratic government, but there is still a long way to go before Sudan can call itself a democracy. There was a change of government in 2019, where Omar al-Bashir, the president since 1989, was toppled. And that was essentially because there were big popular protests demanding civilian rule. Now what has happened on Monday is that the civilian part of the government, the transitional government, was taken out of power, was arrested and kept in house arrest. And during the following days, we have seen big popular protests again, very much the same as those that took place that actually toppled Bashir in 2019. What we really wonder about now is whether the protesters can be successful as they were in 2019, whether the military leader Burhan has to give in or not. So I'm really happy to have Liv and Salma with me today. Let's get to the big question. What has happened in Sudan on Monday, the 25th of October? Why was there military coup? And why was it happening just at this time? Would you like to answer that, Liv?
Well, I would try. So Monday last week, there was a military coup. General Burhan of the Sudan Armed Forces grabbed power against the transitional government that he was himself part of. So after the revolution in 2019, popular protests were able to oust Bashir and the Islamists from power. But the military arm of the former regime were still in power. Although the Sudanese people protested against the military and also wanted to, for that arm of the regime to fall, they were unfortunately unsuccessful, and it ended in a bloodshed called the Khartoum massacre. So basically the military started shooting at the protesters, and we ended up in a situation where the military and the civilian component called Freedom and Change, which was negotiating on behalf of the protesters. They engaged in negotiations. So what we got was a hybrid solution, where the transitional government had both sort of a military arm and also a civilian component. So acting as head of state became a sovereign council of both military and civilian representatives. And for the first part of the transitional period, this council was headed by Burhan himself. And after 21 months, the chairmanship of this sovereign council were supposed to be handed over to a civilian representative. So the military coup came at a time where this was supposed to happen. And so the big question is, why did the military not want to hand over power to the civilian to a civilian representative? And the short answer to that question is because there are too many sort of political and economic interests at stake. First of all, we have had peace negotiations in Sudan and a Juba peace agreement with quite extensive transitional justice components. So the military leaders are quite afraid of being part of a transitional justice process where they will end up in the International Criminal Court. Added to that, they have a lot of economic interests that they are afraid they will lose if power is handed over to civilians. So that's the short answer to your question, Louisa, of why it came at this time, and that's the military have simply too much to lose by handing over power to the civilian component of the transitional government. So the transitional government has been suspended. The constitutional charter of 2019 is no longer active, and Burhan has introduced emergency laws in Sudan. And as Louisa said, we have now seen since then masses of Sudanese people out in the street protesting against the military coup.
But this, you gave a short answer, but a very complex answer. So I think we need to disentangle all these things a bit more. Salma, Burhan said when he took power that I need to help install a competent government. I need to prevent ethnic conflict in Sudan. What did he mean by that, you think?
Yes, first of all, I totally concur with the brief summary of the events. And yes, for Burhan, the first thing, he does not admit that what he has done is a military coup. So from the beginning, he did not call it a military coup. And he claims that the main reason for the procedures he has taken is to save the country from a civil war and also from disorder. And also he talked about the incompetent civilian part of the government. And of course, many people in Sudan do not agree with this because first of all, during the transitional government, he was part of the security situation. So if there is any security threats, it is actually the responsibility of the military. And also there are a lot of reports about also the military role in engaging in this ethnic or encouraging these ethnic or tribal groups to come against or to go against the transitional government. So,
but when you say tribal, Salma, what do you mean then? What did he mean?
Yeah, I mean before this military coup taken place, there has been tension in Eastern Sudan, for example, where the leaders of some tribes they just revolted against the transitional government and they demanded the dissolve of the transitional government. And also this, by the way, also coupled by a failed military coup that took place also in September preceding this military coup. And here also we can see some social groups and also political forces who came in support of the military and also demanded for the dissolve of the government. So this event that happened in October was not a surprise for many people who have been following the events of Sudan, because it was preceded by many events, including some forces that demanded the dissolve of the transitional government, and besides, of course, of the tensions that has been between the civilians and the military members of the Sovereignty Council and the transitional government.
So, but then when he talks about competent government, what is he alluding to here? I mean, is there any kind of, has there been any demands that have been raised against Hamdok? That means the civilian government before that is indicating that the government could not be seen as competent?
Yes, of course, there has been a lot of criticism for the civilian government, and people were dissatisfied with the, especially the economic situation and the performance of the government. I mean, in general, definitely the military. The military also they have role in this situation, because they control a lot of economic investments, and they have their share of this deterioration of economic situation. But again, there has been also criticism of the civilian part of the government, because they all belong to political parties, and they are accused of protecting personal and party interests more than kind of the public good. That's why the military invested in this narrative of the failure of the civilians, because they are politically engaged and they cater for political interest. That's why we need kind of independent competence. But the question still there is what the criteria that you will use or utilize in order to select these competent members of the new government.
Yes, exactly. So when you, Liv, mentioned that the military has strong interest in the economy in Sudan. And that's, of course, an argument that we've heard many times, but it would be nice to know a little bit more about what exactly is it that they control, and how can they manage to kind of maintain this kind of very strong economic power in Sudan also after the change of government in 2019.
Yes, but perhaps we should, I want to start by saying that the military is not like a unitary actor in Sudan. So you have, the military has many arms. So you have the Sudan Armed Forces, where General Burhan, the guy who has done the military coup, is heading. And then you have the Rapid Support Forces, which is a peculiar branch of the military. So when the Sudanese government was waging war in Darfur, they did that through sort of a local militia called Janjaweed. And the leader of the Janjaweed, Mohammed Daglo, his nickname is Hamati. He was the leader of Janjaweed, and I think, is it 5 or 6 years ago, or maybe more, the Janjaweed militia was co-opted into Sudanese military. They became like a formal military force called the Rapid Support Forces. And Hamati is still the leader of this military branch. And he has also been part of the Sovereign Council that I mentioned before, which is like the collective head of state in Sudan, or was before the military coup. And then you have the National Security Forces, responsible for sort of internal security and intelligence. And those forces were quite sort of loyal to Bashir during the former regime. So there are like these three arms, and they are not always sort of necessarily acting together. Like Hamati has not appeared since the coup. So he's, as of now, he's sort of a bit behind the scenes. I think he wants to see which way it will go before he appears. So right now, he can, if this military sort of coup will be sustained, he can come and be part of that. But if the people will hopefully be able to overthrow the military again, then he will also appear and try to be part of that. So yeah, different military sort of arms, so they are not a unitary actor. The military in Sudan, they have strong economic interests, and it's not so easy to get like an overview of all of it because this is not necessarily public information. But Hemeti, for example, he has several companies that he doesn't necessarily lead himself, but family members. One of which is a gold mining company. So as sort of a Darfurian military leader, former militia leader, he has complete control of the gold mines in Darfur. So he's, you know, and that's quite a big business. So he's probably like the most, the richest man in Sudan as of now. And he has very sort of good relations both with Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates. So a lot of the gold is going to the Emiratis. He has also, he and his rapid support forces have also been mercenaries, is that the word? Like soldiers for Saudi Arabia in the Yemeni war, which has also brought a lot of funding for him. In addition to that, to complicate matters, Sudan has, during the Bashir period, they initiate sort of collaboration with the European Union. It's called the Khartoum process, where Sudan has received quite a lot of aid from the European Union. And behind that sort of aid is an understanding that part of their mission is to stop migration from Africa to Europe. So part of this sort of aid has gone to, how can you put it, increase Sudanese capacity to patrol borders. And who are patrolling some of these borders? Yes, it's the former Janjaweed and Hemeti forces. So they have received quite a lot of these funds. And not only are they patrolling borders, but they are also involved in, of course, smuggling themselves. So there's a lot of dimensions to it, but perhaps Salma can come in and speak a bit more about Burhan and how other military actors are also enriching themselves.
Yes, thanks, Liv. You explained very well why Hemeti and RF are very rich. Besides that, the military also controls big amount of companies that involve in investments and production. For example, they're involved in the oil export, and also they control the gum Arabic export, and also the sesame, and also they're involved in weapons production through something called the defense companies systems, and also they're involved in the fuel business. They produce also in the production of cars, the telecommunication companies. The military also has control in the has shares in the banking system, and also water distribution, construction companies, real estate, and also tourism. And they control at least 60% of the wheat production in Sudan. So they are quite powerful in terms of economic interest in Sudan.
So it's really beyond doubt that the military has a lot to lose if they are really kicked out of power. But one thing I also wonder about, and that is, it's clearly pragmatic reasoning behind, but are there any ideological motivations? Does Burhan and Hemeti, or maybe essentially Burhan, have any motivations beyond the economic in order to stay in power, Salma?
Yeah, of course, for me, the Islamists are also interested in this military coup, but I wouldn't say this military coup is staged by the Islamists, or it does not have the back of the Islamist ideology. So as I see it right now, it is purely economic interest. Besides, also they fear that if a democratic government will take place, or if the civilians are handed the power, they will be prosecuted because they have been also involved in a lot of crimes before the revolution, during the Bashir, and also after during the revolution, where they were involved in the massacre of the protesters in front of the military headquarters. So for me, it's more of a political and economic interest that is behind this military coup.
Can I just add? Mm-hmm. It's not very easy just to resort back to Islamism and get that legitimacy, because especially Burhan has made very close ties with Egypt. And as I said, Hemeti with Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates, we are, strongly believing that they are backing this military coup. But they are not interested in an Islamist regime in Sudan. These actors are very sort of anti-Muslim brotherhood and are suppressing these forces within their own countries. So they do not want an Islamist regime in Sudan. So if they just bring back the Islamists, they might become even more isolated than they are now and lose the support of Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and United Arab Emirates. So you can't just bring the Islamists back in. And it seems like they're a bit, there are some indications that there are some disagreements within these different branches right now, because the leader of the NCP, the National Congress Party, which was the main sort of Islamist ruling party during the Bashir regime, was suddenly released from prison. And then the day after was put back. So it's a kind of indicate that someone has released and then someone else is taking them back in prison. And it's these dynamics and the relation with the neighbors that are sort of important to have in mind here to understand these dynamics. So yeah. I very much doubt that we will get sort of just reinstate the sort of the Islamist structures. But definitely, the Islamists are supporting the coup.
Yeah. So Islamist old regime is probably one of the key constituencies of if the government, if the military is succeeding in continuing to hold power, which we probably, hopefully will not see. But who else would be important or are important supporters of Hemeti and Burhan? We have just briefly talked about the Juba Agreement, which allowed in former armed groups into the transitional government. And some people have argued that this inclusion actually bloated the influence of the military, maybe also facilitating the military to take power at the end. So that's somehow indicating that maybe it's not only the old regime, the Islamists, but also some of the armed groups that are really important allied of the military. What do you think, Salma?
Yes, I think to understand the groups that kind of back up or support the military coup, there is a very important event also that took place in September, October, which is called the Palace Sit-In. And this was following the failed coup attempt, where many groups that are supporting the military coup organized a kind of protest, but it was really a mini protest compared to the revolutionaries who are against the military coup. And they decided suddenly to establish a sit-in in front of the palace in Khartoum, resembling to the sit-in that was installed 2 years ago, which led to the ouster of al-Bashir. And looking closely at the components of this sit-in, you will see, of course, as you mentioned, Lovise, the members of the former armed groups, who they formed something called the Charter of National Accord, who are backing the military coup, and also they are calling for the dissolvement of the civilian government. Besides tribal leaders, I mean, compared to the sit-in in front of the headquarters, for the first time we see banners of tribes, like different tribes of Sudan. So it was put against kind of ethnic lines and tribal leaders, in addition to the sympathizers of the former regimes and the Islamists. So these are the main groups that support the military coup.
I think so far we have a better understanding of the military side of the whole situation, but we have to turn to those who oppose the military regime. I think this the protest that's been happening in Khartoum and other cities around the country this week is really something quite unique. It's a display of strength, of quite strong unity among people in in the capital, in many other cities. So what are the demands of the popular protesters? Liv.
Yeah, it's been, I think, first of all, I think the military totally underestimated the amount of people out in the streets and how dissatisfied people will be with the military coup. They've been preparing the ground for this coup, I believe, but they were not prepared for this strong reaction. So there are information is coming out, but I mean, there has been like blocking of internet and telecommunication. So it's not easy to get an overview of what is happening in every location. But we are seeing images of masses of people out in the streets, particularly on 30th of October, from all over the country. And we are getting reports that these protesters are met with gunshots. There's an increasing number of people that have been killed and many more injured. But the reports we are getting are mainly for Khartoum, and I would say that in other regions it's difficult to get an overview of how many have been killed and injured. So again, those at the more marginalized areas are the most vulnerable. So what are they demanding? They are demanding the fall of this military coup. They don't, and they do not want to go back to the hybrid solution. So they want a complete civilian government in Sudan. And this time they're saying they're not willing to compromise. And that they would be in the streets until the military has to step down from power, and we see a complete transition to civilian rule. And they are quite angered by the reactions of the international community thus far. They welcome that the military coup has been condemned. But continuously, international community, and with that I say the US and the EU, and they are sort of arguing or advocating for a reinstatement of the transitional government as it was, basically with both the military and the civilian arm. But what the protesters want is to go back to sort of the to the December revolution, basically, and do it right this time, and really stand for a complete civilian government.
So in the past protest in 2019, we heard of Sudan Professional Association, a collection of unions that were really key in organizing the protests. And then we also heard about neighborhood or resistance committees, consisting of people from neighborhoods in Khartoum and also other cities. Many of them were very young. What are the roles of these two organizations or networks in the protest now, Salma?
Yes, as you rightly said, the Sudanese Professional Association played a key role in organizing the December revolution protests, and everyone, like all the revolutionists, agreed about them as or recognized them as the leaders of the revolution. But unfortunately, later they lost distrust of the people because of also differences and tensions between them and divisions. It seems many people now recognize the neighborhood and local revolutionary neighborhood committees as the leaders of the street. And indeed, currently they are playing key role in organizing the protests on, at the local level, and this is in Khartoum and also in the regions at the same time. And as Liv mentioned, their demands, they made their demands very, very clear, that they want to, first of all, they want Burhan to admit this has been a military coup, because he has denied that. And also they want to reverse the coup and also release all the detainees. Besides also limiting the authority of the military. And this, I mean, yesterday and today, many statements came from various resistance neighborhood committees that they don't want any negotiations, and also no compromise, and also no mediation. And I concur with Liv, they are angry at all levels of mediation, including even the local mediation, and regional or international. And basically they want to go back to square one, where they start to demand for a pure civilian government. Yeah. And so they don't want any of the opportunists to make use of the revolution. Yeah.
Just add that, you know, it's an important aspect that, you know, there was a lot of criticism against the Hamdok government and also of the leadership of the Freedom of Change coalition, sort of represented or said to be represent the protesters and the revolution. But that organization has many arms: political parties, unions, local resistance committees, and civil society. But we would say that political parties have sort of monopolized power within this organization. So there are many, you know, there's been many disagreements, right? But right now, all this disagreement is put aside, and the streets are united again, to sort of to demand the military to step down. But hopefully, if that happens, and I hope it does, there is going to be a different sort of debate about how that civilian government and the transitional government should look like. I don't think it's just going back to the FFC, the Freedom of Change being in charge again. I don't think that would be acceptable to those that are out in the street right now, because that coalition sort of failed.
So if I may add just one sentence to that, just another indication about the importance of the neighborhood committees. Even Al-Burhan, the General Burhan, started creating or making up his own neighborhood committees, bringing kind of youth, meeting with them, and also presenting them as local or neighborhood committees, which also shows the importance of this entity in the current events in Sudan.
Maybe we should say why they are so important. So during the 2019 revolution, the way that the protest was organized in every cities of Sudan was that there were sort of local protests. So each neighborhood was organizing protests, but at the same time. And this was like a deliberate tactic because they knew if they organized a very big demonstration in the heart of the city, then it would be more easy for the security and military actors to contain and clamp down on it. But if you disperse it, then it's more, then some would be clamped down on, but not all of them. So that's how they sort of were able to be to overthrow the Bashir, basically. So we see that they're doing the same tactic now, and although this sort of local resistance or neighborhood committees have been quite sidelined in the transitional period, they've still been sort of operative in terms of grassroots work. So they have sort of gained some experience in leadership during this period, and that really is coming into light now.
So we have seen, probably you have also seen photos from Khartoum where they are building these small walls of bricks where they try to prevent the military from going into the neighborhoods. One of the things that I've been wondering about is whether it has the same character, the resistance, as it was in 2019, where women were really vocal in the protests, and also young people. Do we see the same, or are there any changes to this? What would you say, Salma?
Yeah, for me, I see the same and even more intensified involvement of youth and women. We could see this clearly from the few reports and images that came out of Sudan in the past days. They are very determined to protect their civilian government, and also they want to protect against all kind of negotiations and mediation that will bring Sudan back to the previous period. And women, especially women, are very much motivated in order to prevent, especially the military rule, because they see themselves as the most disadvantaged if military rule came back and we go back to the previous regime policies against women, basically, limiting them their freedoms and yeah, generally they think civilian rule is better for them to be part of the scene.
But then, of course, a very tricky question that it's really hard to answer, and we may not even want to discuss, but we need to, I think, is the realism of their claims. Would it be possible to sort of avoid military involvement in the government as we speak, and how would international negotiations address the demands of the protest for a purely civilian government?
No, it is a difficult situation, but I truly believe that you know, those that were very critical of this hybrid solution were right in a way, because they were saying that this will only postpone the confrontation between the military and the civilians. It won't solve the problem. And if we go back to that solution again, you know, we will be here again talking about military coup in Sudan. So it's kind of for Sudan's sake, I really hope and believe that the people's demands will prevail. But it is difficult because I feel like the international community is not really listening to their demands, and they are more concerned about stability. You know, they want stability in Sudan. It's a very unstable and tense region. And of course, like different sort of neighbors like Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates, US, they have different interests in this stability. But they're, yeah, I just wish that they would give them a chance this time and be on their side for, you know, and on the side of democracy. But is it realistic? I prefer not to answer. I just want to convey that, you know, the people's demand is a complete civilian government, and That's what I am hoping for.
So what do you think, Salma?
Yeah, if I may add to that, I mean, the international or also the regional forces are quite diverse in their reaction towards the military coup. So, for example, we have seen the UAE and Saudi Arabia and Egypt kind of silent or did not at least clearly condemn the military coup, and they asked for they wished kind of best wishes for the Sudanese. While the African Union and many Western countries, and besides the IGAD and also the EU and the UN, they clearly condemned the military coup. And also we have seen the IMF, or the International Military Fund, the main or the key donor for the transitional government. They suspended some of their aid to Sudan. And we have seen also China and Russia position have been also more of support, or the interest is with the military coup. And also we have seen Israel trying to also support the military coup. So even the international community is diverse. But as Liv said, what at stake here is the people's demand. They also not happy with the people who have not been, at least with the community, the international community, which did not condemn the military coup clearly. Yeah, about the scenarios or what is likely to happen, there are various scenarios. Of course, it's possible that the military will succeed and continue with the same scenario as it happened with al-Bashir, that they will capture power for many years to come. But also there is a possibility of a coup on the coup itself. Because also the military is not united, as Liv mentioned earlier, it is possible that some military officers will who are not satisfied with the current situation, that they will try to capture power from the current military leaders. But it's also possible that the military, with the pressure from the streets or from the people of Sudan, that they will no longer be able to proceed with the military coup because the neighborhood committees have declared, for example, civil disobedience. So it's possible that the pressure also from the street with the protests, that will lead that the military will hand in power back to civilians, and that for us the best scenario. Yeah, especially with the pressure from the international community.
Mm. So we heard on the news today, even the Norwegian news covered the fact that the UN Special Envoy to Sudan has told that there are several mediation attempts going on at the moment, and that they're trying to sort of coordinate. What would you think? I mean, there was no detail about it, and I have tried to find out who they are. But who are the likely different initiatives that we can see coming out in the coming days and maybe weeks?
Sure. I mean, there's very little information. All I know is that this is completely rejected by the protesters. This is not what they want. They don't want mediation. They don't want to negotiate with the military. So this is done not sort of on the demand of the current protests. But I don't know, maybe they have had some meetings with Hamdok and they call it mediation. I hope they're not trying to pressure him to appoint a new cabinet, because he has been quite clear that thus far, at least, that he is supporting the protesters. So I'm not really sure. Do you have more information, Salma?
Yeah, as far as I know, there has been an initiative by South Sudan where a delegation, a South Sudanese delegation, came and also met with both parties, with Hamdok and with the military. And they promised that we will hear positive news in the coming days. Beside that, also there is a local initiative. This is kind of, let us say, cartel of businessmen and owners of yeah, I mean, business people who are kind of interested in stability, and also they have interest in the continuation of the status quo. And they are also trying to mediate. And again, as Liv mentioned, this is also being rejected by the local and revolutionaries, because they think this is just opportunist people who try to protect their economic interests in the country, and it will not come up with a result that is that will advantage the majority of the population.
Yes, so this is the status at the moment. Very strong popular protests, maintaining momentum, it seems. Still, the military has not given in to any of the demands, and there is attempts of negotiations, which we know that protesters will not be really happy with. We have some minutes for questions from the audience and from those who are attending digitally. Maybe we should open up for that. So we have a colleague from Sudan who is asking, it is also important to highlight the role of the international community, US, EU, Russia, and especially I'm interested in this Wagner paramilitary group, which is supporting the military in Sudan. We only hear fragmented news about this Wagner group involvement, but it seems that it corresponds with the position of Russia that was clearly presented during the UN Security Council meeting the last meeting in the UN. So the question is the Wagner group. Maybe if any of you know what it is, please explain. If not, maybe address the role of the international community and maybe Russia's particular interest. Salma, do you want to?
Yeah, as far as I know, Russia has already an agreement with the military about this military base to establish a military base in Port Sudan, and their interest, of course, is that the military continues to control power in Sudan, so that their agreement continues. But at the same time, from some reports, I came to know that Russia does not trust both sides, the military and the civilian, and they think both of them, they are after the also economic gains. So for them, either ways, they want to just protect their interest and that they make sure that their agreement continues, yeah, with the government.
So do you want to say something, or should we go to the next question? I think we'll go to the next. I don't have detailed information about the Wagner paramilitary group, but I will sure get it after this.
Yes, so we have one more question on the screen, and then we have some in the audience as well. There have been 6 coups across the African continent this year. Do you believe the timing of the coup in Sudan is part of this larger trend, or should it be looked at as a separate event? And is there any evidence that coups in a specific country or region can affect the probability of coups in other countries? Political scientists.
Yeah, political scientists.
Diffusion theory.
Well, I don't see the coup in Sudan as part of a trend as such, and especially not the timing of it. But I do believe, as political scientists, that there is a possibility of diffusion, and that's if especially in a region, if one sort of military coup happens and it's successful, it can inspire others to do the same. But I have not sort of seen the Sudanese military coup as part of like a bigger trend. I don't know, Salma.
Yeah, maybe one way to look at it is also to look at how people see the military coup in Sudan also as not a continuation, but a duplication of the scenario in Egypt. So that also affect the events in Sudan. So perhaps many people have expected that this move by the military will come following the steps of Assisi. Of course, there are differences with the Egyptian. Is that I mean, many Sudanese are rejected immediately the military, and they will not will not accept that the military will rule the country again. But yes, for me, I see it also as extension of what is happening in Egypt.
But definitely it's, you know, the fact that Sudan is in a region where there's not a lot of democracy has an effect. And as, you know, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, you know, as much as they are not interested in bringing back Islamists to power in Sudan, they're also not very interested in democracy, because they are afraid that this would inspire their own populations to take to the streets and demand the same. So that's, you know, why they are so interested in stability, and that stability should not be a democracy or Islamist sort of regime.
So we have a question from Carlo, CMI colleague.
Yeah, thanks a lot. So I have a question. First of all, I think there is a broader trend, actually, if we look into Myanmar, Mali, Guinea, where military toppled civilian governments in the past years. So I think this is kind of a broader pattern. But the question I have actually is, so what we know from research on nonviolent resistance is actually that protesters often seek alignment with more moderate forces from the military. Do you see in the military some fractures that could align with the demands of the civilians, actually, so that the military is less monotonic and homogenic, and that there could be some splits that could be in favor of the civilian demands?
Totally.
You want to start?
Yes, yeah. I think I can just answer to that. Especially the neighborhood and resistance committees, for example, many of them also look at the military as not as a unitary entity, and they are having conversation, or they're trying to talk to the lower ranks of the military, and talk to them as part of the Sudanese who are disadvantaged by this system, and try to call them to join the resistance against it, because also within the military they have been disadvantaged by this system, and that they should be part of the revolution against the military coup. So yes, I totally agree.
Yeah, and I think we are seeing that mainly within the Sudan armed forces, so lower ranks officers there. And we get, you know, some of the information coming out of reports we are getting that a lot of the violence against the protesters are coming from the Janjaweed or the RSF forces. So if there is opening, it's probably within the Sudan armed forces, I would say, and that's a sort of lower intermediate ranks of the military.
Yes, now we have Lisa, CMI colleague and UAB colleague.
Thank you for an incredibly enlightening morning. I've learned a lot. This has also been a great week past. We've had the Bergen International Film Festival. And so I was just thinking, I just saw a fantastic movie called Faceless on the Hong Kong uprisings, and not least the brutal military clampdown or police clampdown on the protests. So I hear both Salma and Liv, you're very optimistic on the pro side of the protester. The mass mobilization. It seems to me you think that they are so strong that this military, there's just no way they can get away with this coup. Why are you? Because I also want to be on the optimistic side. Mm-hmm. But so what is the reason for this optimism? Is it the split in the military, that you started talking about, how the military is not a unitary actor, or is it the fact that there is actually support within the military for, that they actually have aligned wishes with the, with the protesters? So,
it's hard to be
how can I get on your optimistic train? I think that's my question.
No, I think, first of all, the protesters gained a lot of confidence during the December revolution. They did it once and they really, believe that they can do it again. And I think for once, like the fact that Sudan is a very big country, geographically is an advantage, especially using this tactic that you can organize protests in so many locations at the same time. And the fact that there's millions of people, I mean, it's not like a few people in Khartoum doing it, it's across the country. That is what makes me hopeful. And it's not only protests, there's also civil disobedience. So right now, like people in the central bank of Sudan is on strike, people in all the state oil companies, like there's nobody going to work in the country. I mean, there are limits to how long even, that can, go on at the same time as the US has frozen all its aid to Sudan, the World Bank has frozen all the loans. Like the economy will become crippled, like it's already in a really bad place, right? And also the strikes in the oil companies and the central bank that's directly affecting these economic interests of the military. So it's not only people going out and shouting in the streets, it's like a general strike. And if there is something that we learned from the history of Sudan in all the previous uprisings, because Sudan has a very rich history of toppling military dictatorships, is that these general strikes is really usually what is the tip of the iceberg. So I don't see, if this is if this is sustained, how the military, and now I'm saying like Burhan will stay in power for a very long time if they're able to sustain it. But of course, I mean, they will need the support of some of these military actors in the intermediate, at least. Before power can be fully handed over to the civilians. So my hope is then with the lower intermediate ranks of the Sudan armed forces. But then I also hope and that the international community can get on board, instead of like forcing this mediation that is really not what they want. And there are many reasons why they don't want to go back to this hybrid solution. One is, of course, that they are just delaying the confrontation. But second, that, the civilian component of this government was also not working, right? So those that are out in the streets now are representing a lot of the groups that were sidelined during the transitional government, the youth, women. It was sort of monopolized by political parties that have no legitimacy in Sudan anymore. So it's they want to start fresh in many different ways. But I think this, like the country is like the port in the Red Sea is closed. The road to Khartoum is blocked. They're not getting basic goods. Like the economy is crippled. I mean, it's really like a strong. They're sending a very strong message to Burhan and the leaders in Khartoum.
So now I would like to give Salma the final words, actually. So please, Salma.
Yeah, I mean, just to continue on what Liv said, the reason for my optimism is the determination of the people to bring back their civilian government. And this is obvious from how they are ready to pay this high price of economic problems, but also facing live elimination and the violence of the military. And here I will just borrow one sentence from a young person who said, "They have taken everything from us including fear. So they don't fear anymore, and they want to proceed with their resistance movement. This is why I am optimistic that they will achieve their objectives.
Thank you very much, Liv and Salma, for this very interesting discussion where I think all of us have learned a lot. And I also thank all the audience, digitally and physically here at Bergen Global for coming. And yeah, that's all from us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Let's get out of this.